I'm Cameron Carter, and welcome to No Easy Answer. Today we're talking about who is actually running Venezuela now that President Maduro has been removed from power and President Trump says that the United States is running the country. The question is who is actually running the show? Um, Again, the point of these videos is, for my part, is to inform. I'm not trying to take a side, and if I do take a side, I really want to take the side of the people that don't have a voice, that don't really have anyone that's going to listen to them. And so my goal for this video is to just inform and educate a little bit about the Venezuelan government, who is actually in power in the Venezuelan government, and what the removal of Maduro may have changed, if anything, within the government itself. As we look at the actual structure of the government, it's important to understand the Venezuelan government was really established through the Venezuelan Constitution of 1999. This constitution was written and created under the power of President Chavez, who was elected in 1998. It was approved by a popular forum, and the country was able to vote on this constitution, and it passed with pretty flying colors. Chavez encouraged the populace to read it. It's an easy document to read. Even as a foreigner, and I'm not any sort of legal scholar, and I'm surely not a Spanish scholar, but I was able to read the document, understand what it said, and it was not a difficult read at all. So it's really written in layman's terms for everyone to understand how the government's supposed to be set up and how it's supposed to work. Even to today, you will see people within the Venezuelan government hold up a copy of the Constitution, point to it, and refer to it constantly. That is not anything that has changed. Now, the actual outworking and application of, and use and actual loyalty to the Constitution is very much in question. That has not been followed for a long time. So what does the Constitution really set up? What it says is that the government is structured into 5 parts, a little bit different than the American Constitution, where the government is separated into 3 co-equal branches. The Venezuelan Constitution tries to set it up into 5. You still have your executive, your legislative, and your judicial branches, but additionally you have the popular branch, or the citizenry branch, and you have the electoral branch. And so each of these groups have power as designated within the Constitution. They have certain rights, certain responsibilities they have to fulfill in order to make the government work. Now, the way the Constitution is set up is actually really tried to focus towards the citizenry. It really is trying to set up so that people, if they can get together, if they can work together, they can actually make the most amount of changes for themselves and for the country writ large. This really takes place through these groups called Consejos Comunales. At the beginning, they're kind of called Bolivarian circles. That's not quite the right term. Bolivarian circles were about learning about this constitution and other aspects of Venezuelan culture and history. But the Consejo Comunal is basically a local council of people that live in a similar area. They get together and they are able to make determinations about what are the changes they need to see in their own area where they live. From there, they are able to go and solicit resources from the government or in order to make those changes in their area. And while I was there, I saw there were some Consejo Comunales community councils that worked extremely effectively, and they were able to make a lot of positive changes for their areas. There were some that were not very effective. Sometimes the lines were just not drawn in good ways, and so you'd have a main road, and then one side of the road would be one community council area, and then the other side would be another, but they shared the same road. And so even though they shared the same geography, they were in different areas or different community councils, and so it just didn't work all the time. But there were cases where they did work, and they did work very effectively. So that's just kind of the general thing. Now, during the time I was there, really, you saw, obviously Chavez was in the executive, and then that was taken over by Maduro. Chavez's party was called the Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, PSUV, which is the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. And so he definitely had power over the executive. The legislative was the National Assembly, and that was divided between many different political parties. There's a number of different political parties within Venezuela. Basically, tried to consolidate all of the left-leaning, socialist-leaning parties into themselves. Didn't quite happen, but they tried. and as it grew on time, it grew in power and influence and began to incorporate more and more of them. Not all of them came on board. And then you had a lot of the opposition parties who were trying to resist PSUV. And so the National Assembly was divided. By the time I got there, the PSUV had the majority of the legislative number in there. Then you get to the judicial, and that's kind of their version of the Supreme Court, Tribunal Supremo de Justicia, and that eventually was taken over by loyalists to Chavez as well. So pretty soon, it didn't take long in the progress of the government to have almost all three branches owned by one single party, and then eventually even the electoral and the people that worked in the electoral area were completely taken over by PSUV. So now you're only left with really the citizenry, which is going to have to decide where they have to go with. So you see one party slowly taking over all different branches of government. And I'm just sharing what happens in Venezuela. Whatever happens in the United States that might be similar. This is just complete coincidence, maybe. But I'm just kind of sharing what happens when you have one party that tends to take over. And that party never really got out of power. It continues in power to this day. They have complete control over the executive, over the legislative, over the judicial, and over the electoral. And the citizenry is really scared to even try to resist on any way, shape, or form at this point, aside from the protests we talked about in the last episode. So within the Venezuelan government, there's kind of a group of 6 individuals that really kind of consist of the top leaders of the government. Those were, of course, Maduro and Celia Flores. They're no longer in power, but directly below them, you had a brother and sister combo of Delcy and Jorge Rodriguez. Delcy was the vice president. She's now the appointed president, interim president. Jorge Rodriguez occupied many different roles. He's currently head of the legislative branch, so he's kind of like the Speaker of the House, if you want to say along those lines. Vladimir Padrino Lopez is in charge of all sorts of the military, and his role is kind of the military minister to work in that, and foreign minister. We'll go into his roles in a second. And then we have Diosdado Cabello, who's in charge of, he's in charge of the foreign ministry, and he's in charge of a lot of the police functions within the country, amongst many, many, many other things. These six people really ran the country. It was very much an oligarchy composed of these 6 people, but then you had a whole other set of ministers that were below them. And during my time in Venezuela, new ministries were created constantly. And from what I can tell in my research, that has not stopped. There's been a continual addition of ministers and ministries and different government offices and function. It's just grown and grown and grown without any sort of breaks. And there's just more and more people that come into the government, more people that are brought into power. And then it depends who's actually on top of who. But it's, again, we talk about palanca, who's got more leverage than somebody else. And how that actually plays out, that's anyone's guess on one to the next. Let's talk a little bit of background on some of these folks. So Delcy and Jorge Rodriguez. Again, Delcy was the former vice president. She also held multiple positions throughout the government through the time of Chavez and into here. Jorge, again, head of the National Assembly. The interesting thing about these two, and this is going to be very important as we move into the next section describing who, now that we know who's running the country, what were the motives behind this, and how did this actually play out with the removal of Maduro? It's very important to understand they had a very formative experience in their childhood. Their father, also Jorge, named Jorge, was a socialist, and he studied at the UCB, which is the Central University in Venezuela. And as he grew older, he was still part of the socialist group, and they were trying to make moves against the right-wing government of Venezuela at this time. They actually ended up kidnapping an American executive from Owens, Illinois. They asked for a $20 million ransom, and they got it. Now, this American executive was kidnapped for over 3 years. This is an extremely long time to be held for ransom. Eventually, they were able to collect Jorge and his group of socialist kidnappers were able to collect this $20 million ransom. Apparently, there was discussion about who or how that money actually got used once they collected it. and one of the group that Jorge was with didn't like how he had used the money or how someone else used the money, and he was ratted out. Because he was ratted out, he was captured by the Venezuelan intelligence agency. And again, the Venezuelan government at that time was right-leaning, so they were not in support of the socialists. He was taken in by this intelligence agency. He was tortured, and he died under torture. Because of that, Jorge and Delcy, his son and daughter, his two kids, were marked for life. They were very young at this point, I think in their early teens, maybe not even to the teenage years, and they were marked. And so they have continued on a legacy of understanding that, or blaming and living under the reality that their father was killed for his socialist identity, for his social beliefs, for his socialist actions. And they blame the United States and its presence within the right-wing Venezuelan government at that time for the death of their father. So there are a lot of hard feelings for the United States. There's a lot of hard feelings towards any sort of capitalistic government, and they are very much on the socialist brand, if you want to call it that, because of that. Now, again, these aren't people that are model socialists. These are not people that, when the population was going hungry, they weren't going out there and sharing their bread with folks in factories and working a shift alongside them. That was not what these folks were doing. They were still very much in power, very much enjoying all the luxuries that power brought them. And even though it seems like, from what I've been able to research, Delcy's influence increased after about 2020, 2019. And apparently a lot of her work has actually been able to bring much more stability to the country. She's been able to work towards that and actually help increase economic growth within the country. Still, I'm not going to say these are very moral, ethical people for everything that went down. But just keep that in mind. Okay, moving along. Vladimir Padrino Lopez. He's a name I was not familiar with. I had to look up. So he is the defense minister. Interestingly enough, he took courses at the School of the Americas in the early 90s or mid 90s. This is the infamous Fort Benning, Georgia school that was instrumental in training many Latin American dictator death squads, where they'd go out and they would disappear people, torture people, kill people, all in the name of trying to defeat communism. And so a lot of the very nasty, evil stuff that was done within Latin America in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s, that came through the school as the justification to defeat communism or any potential extent of communism within Latin America. So interestingly enough, he actually studied there. He has been sanctioned by various countries. He cannot travel to Colombia. He cannot travel to other places. He's been, again, accused of many human rights violations, along with a lot of the folks that are involved in this government. Next, we have Diosdado Cabello Rondon. His name literally translates to God-given hair. No comment. I'm not in any position to comment myself, but interesting enough, that's kind of what his name means. He is the Minister of Interior, Justice, and Peace, ironically enough. And as we talk about this guy, just remember, he really likes to describe himself as a man of peace, as a person who pursues peace. And he likes to be called the Minister of Peace, however you want to call it. It's interesting how he pursues this term. Interestingly enough, he actually used to be the president of Venezuela for a very short term. In 2002, Chavez was actually removed from power forcibly by a coup. At that time, he had wide popular support because he just was elected in 1999. The opposition, who was opposing Chavez, was kind of the old guard, who were the old politicians, who had the old sway, the old influence, the old money. They did not like what Chavez was doing because he was basically pushing them out of power. And so they, with the help of the United States government, and this is all proven, you can look it up, they instigated a coup and were able to remove Hugo Chavez from power, and they flew him out of Venezuela, and he was on an island out in the Caribbean. In the meantime, another man, Pedro Carmona, came in, declared himself president. He had the support of the Venezuelan Navy, some other institutions there that supported him, but the people were not happy with this situation. And so after a very tumultuous 2-3 days, the people basically came out of the hillside barrios, walked down to the middle of town, walked down to the presidential palace, and began storming the palace, demanding that Hugo Chavez be returned as president. They succeeded. One of Chavez's key elements was that he always was very, very close with his own presidential security. He was close with the military. He's close with the police. He was a veteran himself. He was serving in the military. That's a whole other story there. But because of that, his presidential guard that was still in the presidential palace was very loyal to Chavez. So this new guy showed up and they saw all the people coming there. They organized and they chased the interim president out, and they were able to demand Hugo Chavez to come back. While they're waiting for Chavez to come back from this island, Diosdado came in, declared himself as a pro tem president. And this lasted for a couple of hours. So he was one of the shortest lived presidential terms on earth that he was there, but used to be president. Keep that in mind. He's also the head of the colectivos. Now, the colectivos these are like the collectives. It's basically like a group. It's like a motorcycle gang that is sanctioned by the government. Imagine a police force that is formal and informal at the same time. They ride around on motorcycles, and if you have done something that has run afoul of the government, the regime, or someone within it, they are the hands that will come in it and take you out. Apparently, I've even just learned today, they monitor even communication on the WhatsApp app. And so that's an app that's used a lot throughout Latin America for people to communicate back and forth. And apparently they've tapped into that so they can see what everyone's messages are across WhatsApp. And so if you begin to say things against the government, they will come and they find you. And so Diosdado is the head of these colectivos. You'll see in just a second. Immediately after Maduro was removed, he was on the streets with the colectivos, riding around on motorcycles, and making himself well known and present in the streets to try to bring order and keep everyone submissive and at bay for everything that's going on. Additionally, he has his own TV show, his own website called El Mazo Dando, which means like the club or the mace that's going at it. So that's kind of how he sees himself, just hitting away and swagging away things. On that show, he is actually being called out for human rights violations because human rights investigators have come to the country, and he has actually called out on live national television, where they're located, where they're going, the number of the flight they're taking to leave the country. And he's trying to basically tell his people to go out and get those people and intimidate them so they never come back. So there have been many, many, many human rights abuses that have even been happening on live TV during his show. Even as far back as 2015, he was described as having drug trafficking links. And this whole Cartel de los Soles, the one that Maduro is being accused of being part of, he was accused of being part of that as far back as 2015. Well before Maduro was ever accused of being part of this whole thing. He was also connected to threats to assassinate then Senator Marco Rubio back in 2017. So again, whether it was real or not, there was threats supposedly and they were traced back to him. So he has history. He's no fan of Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is no fan of him. That's part of it. The last thing I want to say is his own formation. He actually ended up playing baseball with Chavez when they were younger. So they knew each other from back in the day. Venezuela is very much a baseball country. I'm wearing the shirt of the Magallanes, which is a baseball team there I was a fan of. Anyways, Viva Magallanes. But yeah, so he was involved with Chavismo, with the Chavez movement really from the get-go. And he's a smart guy. At the military institute he studied out, supposedly he had the 5th highest IQ of anyone that ever studied at the institute. So he's not a dumb guy. He's very smart, but he doesn't want to be in the forefront of the position of power. It really seems like he likes to stand in the background. He's always present, but he's not the public number one leader. He's just there in the background, but he's doing a lot. His nickname is called the octopus because he has his tentacles extended everywhere. Take that for what it is. So how did all these folks respond to Maduro's removal? Delcy on Saturday said, she demanded to respect of international law. Of course, we're going to run to international law when it's convenient. And she said it was a complete and brutal aggression against the Venezuelan people. On Sunday, this is where things change a little bit. She said, we extend an invitation to the government of the U.S. to work together on an agenda of cooperation. So first of all, we're saying, how dare you do this? And now we're more of a conciliatory note. And again, we'll get back to why this is on the next episode. In terms of the military response from Padrino, he said on Saturday that the armed forces are going to resist whatever attempt of foreign intervention. So again, this is more of a resistance against the taking of Maduro on Saturday, immediately afterwards. On Sunday, sorry, that should say Sunday, not Saturday. The military issued a document saying that the Venezuelan government recognizes Delcy Rodriguez as the appointed president, and so she can count on the military for having full support. So trying to present a united front in the midst of all this, not trying to show any sort of division between this group, between the Rodriguezes, the military, and the Diosdado. And then he also said the government guarantees the governability of the country. So that basically the Venezuelan government is clearly in charge. They're the ones that are running, and they're the ones that are going to continue to run the government as things continue, even though the president, Maduro, is not there. Diosdado on Saturday, again, there is out there with the colectivos. He said, hey, stay calm. Let no one fall into the things of the enemy invader, the terrorist enemy who cowardly attacked us. So again, very, very vocal against the actions of the United States. He didn't really make any other proclamations from what I can tell after that. He was definitely present when Delcy was coming in to be president, sworn in as president, and he was president when Delcy was making these statements that seemed a little more reconciliatory to the United States. So he's there. Nonetheless, I saw there were some reports that at least 14 journalists have been disappeared since I think Sunday going into today, Monday. And again, the WhatsApp messages are being monitored. So I've heard also from just on the ground that the colectivos are all over the place. They're making themselves very well known throughout the city of Caracas, at least. I guess it's throughout the country, and they're definitely letting themselves know that they're there and they're in charge and they're running the show, so that the population of Venezuela is not in any way confused about who is running the country. So what did removing Maduro really accomplish? In my mind, it's very clear. Removing Maduro did not blow up the Death Star. It didn't kill Vecna, and it most certainly did not throw the Ring of Power into Mount Doom. It really did very little, if anything, for the perceived good of the populace of Venezuela at that time. The existing government that Maduro was part of is still there. They are still in force, and they are still running the show, and there is no evidence this is going to be any change to that whatsoever. Even Trump, when he was questioned about the possibility of Maria Cornelia Machado, the opposition leader, coming in and ruling, he kind of blew her off and said, I don't think she can do it. I don't think she has the ability and the respect to be able to run the country. And this points to the fact that Trump is looking to the existing government, just without Maduro and without Celia, to continue to run the show. But there's been much talk, much threat, and much demands that they continue to work with the United States government. So there it is. The Venezuelan government is running Venezuela. Let's be clear about that. The question becomes, are they going to take orders from Trump, or are they going to act independently on their own? And that's where we need to sit down and do some analysis to actually figure out what the reason as to why all these things happen. What happened? What was the purpose? What was the motivation? Who were all the parties involved to try to force Maduro to leave? And for what end game purpose were they trying to accomplish? That'll be next episode. Join us next time on No Easy Answer. Thank you so much for being with us. If you like this, you can subscribe, and we'll be back next time. Lord bless.